Welcome to Swallow the Gap, the podcast that delves into the critical world of dysphagia care. I'm your host, Dr. Tim Stockdale, and I'm thrilled that you've come to join us for conversations aiming to bridge the gap in dysphagia education and practice. Swallow the Gap podcast is a production of Gap Education, and nothing we say should be taken as legal advice or without scrutiny. We value diversity in backgrounds and opinions, so our guests will not always reflect what we believe. Through critical reasoning and open minds, we serve as catalysts for advancement in medically focused speech-language pathology. What does it look like to bring value when time, productivity standards, and other systems are working against you? Tune in for more. Welcome to Swallow the Gap, the podcast that delves into the critical world of dysphagia care. I'm your host, Dr. Tim Stockdale, and I'm thrilled that you've come to join us for conversations aiming to bridge the gap in dysphagia education and practice. We value diversity in backgrounds and opinions, so our guests will not always reflect what we believe. Through critical reasoning and open minds, we serve as catalysts for advancement in medically focused speech-language pathology. Welcome back, everybody. Today, I'm joined by Jaimie Anderson. She is a clinician, clinical researcher, and clinical instructor at the University of South Florida, specifically within the Joy McCann Culverhouse Center for Swallowing Disorders, which is a multidisciplinary clinic. She works with another speech pathologist. She works with gastroenterology. Jaimie, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the center where you work?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Tim. So as you said, I am a speech language pathologist primarily. So I see patients every single day. I work at one of the nation's first swallowing centers, started right after Johns Hopkins really published the concept of a swallowing center in the 80s. It was started by a wonderful pioneer, Dr. Worth Boyce, who is a gastroenterologist, esophagologist, and then joined by my peer and mentor, Joy Agaziano. It is gastroenterology and speech pathology. So swallowing centers can be made up in a whole host of different specialties, but that is at its core. So we have 2 gastroenterologists, 2 speech pathologists, we have nurses and staff, and then we work really closely with our colleagues in ENT and psychology and dietitian, GI surgery. So really lucky to work with a bunch of other experts that are very passionate about what they do.
That sounds awesome. That sounds amazing. I know one of the things that at least I don't believe, get enough focus on is multidisciplinary care. I mean, we have so much just to learn within our education, 9 diagnostic categories and how to be a clinician, how to take data and do all this other stuff, that it can get pushed too far to the wayside what other disciplines are doing to help support us in the work that we do to serve patients. And obviously we can't do it all. We're not supposed to be able to do it all. So it's really cool to see that come together and that special sort of synergy in the perspective that everybody else has.
Yeah, I think to jump on that, I think when people hear multidisciplinary care, they think that the only way that we can really get that is through centers like mine. And I'm very lucky that there was so much behind the scenes work to get us to where we are today. I did not create this center. I did not create the environment for it. But since I've been here, I have established so many more relationships to expand what used to be really GI surgery, speech, to these other disciplines. So I really want to encourage people that multidisciplinary care doesn't have to be what I have, which is all under one roof. We're all talking to each other and sharing these patients. I think it can start really small. It's all about relationship building. It's all about demonstrating your worth and then accepting that there are other disciplines and other individuals that have something to add to your patients. And I think if you establish that relationship, you do not have to be in the same institution, let alone the same building, to then have true multidisciplinary care. It's just recognizing that I can only offer so much. And and my patients will benefit more from others. And I think of psychology, I think of dietitian, I think of course, ENT and GI, but, I think any and all clinicians can get there from acute care to outpatient. Of course, it's way easier for me, but just establish those relationships.
Yeah. No, that's really, I mean, it's kind of a luxury, but it
Yeah.
shouldn't be, right? It shouldn't be. I recently was talking to a friend of mine who works in a hospital network in Florida. And he asked me if when I was at the hospital, if I would do ICU rounds. And my answer was no. Like I didn't because of the P word, productivity. And the
Mm,
time that we were spending talking with other people, we weren't billing for stuff, which in a hospital is kind of ironic because you're not
mm,
like technically really billing for stuff anyway, because it's under bundle care. But
yeah,
it's weird, those limitations that we have. And so I'm gonna put you on the spot
that's a good point.
a little bit. How Okay, so people are listening who are likely in a similar situation where they understand the benefit from doing rounds from this multidisciplinary care, but they don't get the time to do it
Hmm.
because it's seen to be perhaps a threat to the budget of the department, or it affects the bottom line in some way. What are some ways that you think they can advocate, or maybe think whether it's things you've seen in your practice, things you've read about in research, any way that you think can be used as leverage for us to be able to get
Mm.
more of this?
That's a great question. And honestly, you saying the productivity, the P word, was such a good turn back to say, yeah, that's great and all, but how do you do it when you have those demands? I think each facility, each individual is going to have different demands. And of course, if we're talking like in the acute care and or inpatient, SNF, all of those that your time is very limited and most likely you're just trying to get by with seeing the amount of patients that you're supposed to see and then get the documentation done. I will say that this gets beyond speech pathology. I think it's a healthcare system problem,
I
and I
agree.
think one that continues to worsen over time. I wouldn't say that I'm the best best to mirror in terms of like where my boundaries are in the sense that I think you have to meet somewhere in the middle, right? We can't demand something without demonstrating it, but you can't demonstrate it without having the time. And so I think if there's ways to, again, you've got to start small. I think a lot of people, I had somebody observe our clinic recently, and I just kept emphasizing that it's like you don't have to create this perfect system and wait for this perfect system or only ask for this one way of doing things. It's got to be something that you build up. So again, I think, can you establish those relationships, and especially establish those relationships? And I don't mean like formal meetings. You see that physician in the hallway, you have those small conversations, you send a quick email that says this is what I saw, and this is so that way they keep hearing your name, they keep seeing
Hmm.
you. I think, and they go, oh wow, that person keeps doing really good work, they're very valuable. And I think it's really taking yourself outside of your personal department, and especially if you can get that with somebody, especially a surgeon, but people that make a lot more money than us for the hospital. And I can speak to that as like I've been a part of an awake craniotomy team and now this swallow center team. And in both situations, the thing that was needed to get anywhere was having that physician, having that surgeon value me. So I think it's, yes, some of this might be pushing you. You can't ask for, I'm a big person of like ask for forgiveness, not for permission. So establish those relationships, get in there with that surgeon, get in there with those people that like have more funding behind them. And then all of a sudden, when you're advocating for yourself, you're advocating with the people are at the top tier of the hospital. And so you're not this like, no offense, we're the red haired stepchildren in the back of in the basement of rehab that don't fit with PT and OT. And so when you're just this little peon, it doesn't matter how smart you are, because I've been there, it really has to be, again, start those relationships and then kind of let that naturally follow, whether that's a trach team, whether that's an awake craniotomy team, whether that's a swallowing team, whether that's just like a social work speech pathology team. I mean, it doesn't, they all don't look the same.
Yeah. So two main points that I hear you saying
Yeah,
are one, demonstrate your value, and two,
definitely.
small steps first. Small steps first. So through demonstrating your value, I mean, be good at what you're doing, understand the rationale. I mean, that's a given, and nobody, I mean, none of us like to think that we're not good at what we're doing. But so instead of maybe focusing on that negative side, like I know there are things that I'm not good at, but focus more on the like, Where can I improve? What types of things do I not know? And to me, conversation with other clinicians is a really strong place
Mm,
to grow that. I mean, not just through self-reflection, but getting other people's perspectives is a super efficient way to do that because everybody has learned so many different things from different perspectives. So especially like if you talk to
yeah.
someone who's grad school somewhere else or work somewhere different, those sorts of conversations help you to grow, but they also spark curiosity because you learn why it's interesting to somebody else. And so I think that's really cool. And that, of course, is not a comprehensive way. Like, how do we get competency? Oh,
No,
we talk to people, right? But it's a
yeah.
good step in the right direction.
Well, I love what you just said. And so I want to back to one thing and like, how do you demonstrate your value? I will say what you're talking about is how do you like grow your value,
Hmm.
which I think is so important. In demonstrating one like plug, I'd say is do really good documentation. I think even when I was in acute care and everybody was writing impression statements that were 1 line long, I follow the same diagnostic impression statement no matter what. And I think it answers all. It's a diagnosis, it's a severity, it's the main characteristics, it's
Hmm.
the suspected etiology, it's the expectation for growth. I did not make that up. I was taught that as a clinical fellow and I've used it for this day. And I think when you write a really solid impression statement that's not just swallow problem, speech problem, and you don't
Hmm.
even give the diagnosis, that's how you demonstrate your value in like microaggressive ways. But
Microaggressions. Oh dear.
right. I
Better
mean,
watch
well,
it.
yeah.
I,
Again, but I love what you said though. Curiosity. I think
hmm.
we just did a round of interviews for externs, and they always ask like, what makes a good extern or good early clinician? And I do think it's curiosity. I do think it's
Hmm.
passion, which that's where the microaggressions come from. But I think it absolutely like you're demonstrating your value, but just because you are doing that does not mean that you know everything. It does not mean that you have to prove that you're better than everybody else, right? That's not the way to go about it. So I love that you're saying that. I think once you get, I know the students are like getting feedback, like drinking from a fire hose. And same thing with a lot of clinical fellows, not all, but many clinical fellows. And you guys are so ready to be independent and just out there. But then there's something so lonely and so hard when you don't have somebody to give you feedback. And so I so encourage people to continue to, I stay in touch with many of my students. My clinical fellow mentor is literally like my co-researcher now as
Nice.
a clinician. So I keep people, good people in your network, texting them, calling them, even if they're not in your institution. Because yes, like if you don't have that critical eye on you, I love something Inessa Humbert said that always stuck with me. I'm sure she didn't like create it, but it was like, how many years have you been practicing? Have you been practicing for 10 years or have you been practicing for 1 year, 10 times?
Yeah.
And that's like the difference between, but I think the only way you get there is by actually getting feedback, which is hard to do, but it's good for us.
Well, that's a part of it. And I think you've touched on something really important. It's self-awareness and self-reflection, self-awareness, because you think about why is feedback important versus just reading something. Because I can read something and
Mm,
it tells me how to do something, but unless I'm aware of where I am in that process,
mm,
it's you're going to take a very kind of singular approach to this and not something that's customized to where you are versus if you have a mentor or a colleague or who knows something and they can look at you and analyze where you are and give you some guidance as to how you uniquely get to that point, then that's invaluable. In the same way, if you're very self-aware and you know where your shortcomings are and you're willing to be vulnerable with yourself, which can be kind of painful to say like, oh,
yeah,
I know I really maybe I excel at this, but I really need to get better in this area. And so you apply that mirror to yourself and see yourself through this very unique lens of like, okay, I need to know myself so that I can know how to lead
yeah,
myself. That
yeah,
type of thing too. So it's very unique. Also, I wanted to circle back. So you
yeah.
mentioned because this is very practical take home in your impression statement,
Hmm.
how it's different than some of the others. You mentioned demonstrating value in that, not just saying the patient has dysphagia, which made me think like, yeah, typically doctors reach out to they because they already know. Well, they highly suspect, and maybe they
Hmm.
already know the patient has dysphagia. So we need to bring something to the table that they don't know, right? And so, could you, you're right, give an
Yes,
example of a hypothetical patient, like a diagnostic
absolutely.
statement.
Yeah. And again, anytime I've done lectures on dysarthria, I've done lectures on dysphagia, and it's the same. So patient presents, I'm going to use acute care because I think the majority of patients will be in acute care, and you have a clinical swallow. Patient presents with suspected oropharyngeal dysphagia. And I mean, there's certain things that I'll say that everything in our field is like stepping on grenades, if you will. But
Yeah.
patient presents with a suspected oropharyngeal dysphagia characterized by overt clinical signs of aspiration. Additionally, patient presents with a right lingual weakness, reduced right velar elevation, and suspected dysphonia characterized by breathy over rough vocal quality. Unclear etiology of suspected oropharyngeal dysphagia. However, however, etiology appears consistent with a possible right lower motor neuron damage post. And I'm getting with one that might be a little bit more aggressive because I'm thinking of an exact case that I did this with post like cardiac surgery. Recommend modified barium swallow study and consult with neurology. And in that case, I've been in this situation a million times. You do your cranial nerve. Again, how do you demonstrate your worth? Do standardized, consistent cranial nerve exams that are part of every single one of your evaluations, because we're half the time the only ones that are actually looking, and take it that step further. We are a pathologist. So when we can diagnose a host of speech, language, cognitive, communication, swallowing problems. But what is the suspected etiology of the situation, or unclear, right? And so if it's an unclear, or I'm doing an MBS and they have what looks like weakness, then we need to take it that step further. And so again, that's kind of where it all comes in. So it's severity, of course, in this clinical swallow example, you can't give that, but severity, diagnosis, dysphagia, hypokinetic dysarthria, cognitive communication deficit, fluent aphasia, so forth. Major characteristics under any of those umbrellas. The suspected etiology, it's very consistent with Parkinson's. It's very consistent with ALS, or I don't know. And so then what is their expectation for improvement? Well, if you don't know, then you know what the etiology is, then that kind of tells you. And I truly believe if you have that, and once you just do it consistently, you answer every question that a doctor might ask you, a patient might ask you, a patient's family might ask you. What's going on with my family member? Why did this happen? Will this get better? What's the plan? And you answered all of those. So when you step out of the room and all of a sudden, when you've documented this, if a doctor or a family member asks you, you are ready and you've thought about it, right? It forces you to ask all of the whys. Why do they have this problem? Will they get better?
Yeah, fairly comprehensive.
But succinct. It's like 3-4 sentences, I swear.
Yeah. No, and that's exactly what I mean. Succinct and comprehensive is exactly what our impression statement should be. One thing that something that I appreciate you pointed out, and you actually said it in two different places. I think at the beginning you said suspected oropharyngeal dysphagia, and then at the end when you were saying like it could be characteristic of Parkinson's or something like that.
Yeah.
Like you're okay with not knowing, which is huge. To me, it's huge because I think it demonstrates integrity and intellectual honesty versus so many of us, myself included, aren't super okay with uncertainty. Well, I'm better about it than I used to be, but I think it's important because you can lead to misdiagnoses. And overdiagnosis of dysphagia if on every clinical swallow evaluation you're like, I heard coughing, so they have dysphagia, that sort of a thing, when we know like, well, it could be something else. We don't know what we can't see, and we can't see what's in the pharynx and in the larynx. And so if coughing is occurring, how do we know if there's a bolus there or not? That type of thing too. But also, I mean, there are people who are obviously a lot, I mean, what am I trying to say in terms of the suspected etiology? Like if we don't have a medical diagnosis and we can't say like in the presence of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or whatever it is.
Yeah,
I got lost in my thoughts a little bit there.
I mean, I'd
sentence,
love
please.
to. Yeah, no, I'd love to
You know what I'm
if you
saying?
don't mind. And actually, this goes into, and I mean, I know we're in the swallow the gap, like or bridge the gap. But I half of my world is swallowing, and then the other half is motor speech. And so at ASHA, with one of my dear friends, Dr. Renee Utiansky, and I spoke on what do you do when you have an unclear diagnosis of dysarthria. And so there's a whole presentation that we did. And, you know, that we talked about that exactly. And I do think we have to be careful on like what the steps are. So a perfect example of what you're saying is like, what do you do in this situation? I had a patient who came to me with a history of a stroke, recurrent aspiration pneumonias, presents with this dysarthria, presents with this dysphagia. I could very clearly just stay there and just say, oh yeah, they had a stroke once and like that's what the problem is. But the
Hmm.
problem was progressive. The problem was worsening. And the speech was not consistent with the area of the stroke. And
Hmm.
so it was very clear to me that I was dealing with somebody with a neurodegenerative disease. And I very highly suspected that it was Parkinson's. However, not my lane. I am not a neurologist. However,
Yeah.
I didn't say Parkinson's specifically. I said presents with a suspected neurodegenerative disease, right? Or suspected with a lower motor neuron, upper motor neuron issue. So I wouldn't ever name the exact Parkinson's, stroke, so forth, but I would name the broad diagnosis, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of
And they
that I
did,
can.
by the way, 3 neurologists later, they did finally get a diagnosis of Parkinson's.
Yeah.
But I had to push for that. I had to advocate for that. Like it was
Yeah.
frustrating.
Well, I think there is a tremendous amount of value in being able to demonstrate that we see these neurological signs and this is a suspicion, like through our communication. I can see potentially the other end of that too, in terms of like if we're too straightforward or too explicit or put something in our documentation, especially when everyone has access through like my chart or something like that,
Hmm.
that, oh, the speech pathologist said I might have Parkinson's. So I
Right.
just in general being careful of that. But overall, the principle, like if we're talking about demonstrating our value and we have an intensivist or a hospitalist refer a patient to us for unknown dysphagia, primary care provider, whoever, and we're
Right.
able to like help piece this together and be an integral piece of the
Exactly.
differential diagnosis process, like that's huge. That is doing so
Yep.
much to demonstrate our value.
And
But
you can have different conversations. This is circling back to the original part of the conversation of this like multidisciplinary team. You can have different conversations than what you document, right? So when
mhm.
I reach my gastroenterologist and I'm reviewing swallow studies with him, what I write in my documentation, which is within my lane and
Yeah,
what I'm
yeah,
allowed
I
to
think that's
do,
huge.
is very different than what I say to him. I say, I think this person has achalasia. And he totally, because of the relationship that we have, he is not offended by that. He does not think that I'm overstepping, but that is something verbally that I'm saying,
Yeah, it doesn't get
that
back
I
to the
am not.
patient from you.
Yeah. And so I don't diagnose it, but I get straight to the point, right? Same thing with my neurologist. When I was writing in the documentation, I'm saying presents with a suspected progressive neurogenic need, a second opinion or fourth, fifth opinion for
Yeah.
neurology in my document, in my message to the neurologist, because I've established these relationships, because we've had these conversations, because I'm not coming out of left field and they're like, who the heck is this person? I can say, this really looks like Parkinson's, like, and these are all the reasons why.
Hmm.
But you have to establish those relationships and you have to kind of see where that doctor is. And just like we tell our patients with communication deficits, it's a two-way street.
Hmm.
And so you have to find the right people that are willing to kind of have that conversation with you. Again, I'm
Yeah.
not going to the doctor saying, I think you totally messed up. That's the wrong diagnosis. I'm right.
Hmm.
It's anytime you can really like have that back and forth is helpful.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of value to that. It's a touchy area, just the whole idea of staying within our lane, within our scope, within documentation. But how do we, I mean, because there are many things that we know how to do that help to lead to a differential diagnosis process, like even
Hmm.
with, or not even with, but especially with our cranial nerve exam, if you're looking at
Absolutely.
how is the face moving? Where is the reduced movement? And just trying to distinguish if it's an upper motor neuron versus a lower motor neuron lesion for that. And so, like bringing that information to the physician and talking about it. I just, and I'm being perhaps neurotic. I'm going to put this out here. I think this is fantastic, but just putting this out here that we are talking specifically about like what we do. We're not saying, hey, you need to go and start talking to your doctor and be like, I think this person has Parkinson's, or this person has ALS, because we don't know where we don't know there's a lot to that, and so I just want to make
Yeah.
yeah, sure that
Yeah.
that is communicated as something that
That
like
makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. You get, but
No, no,
that type,
I agree. I mean, I think it goes back to what you said. You got to know your lane. And I've been practicing for 12 years across different settings and different populations.
mhm,
And I think it goes back to, and this is like some of what you were talking about with, you can read an article or you
mhm.
can know information, but like there's a difference between like getting that like clinical experience and stuff. And so when you were saying that, again, how do we kind of triangulate? How do we turn research into clinical practice? And I think when we think about that like little evidence-based triangle of clinician, research, and then the patient, right? I think we always think of ourselves as a clinician here, right? So I'm the
Mhm.
clinician, then I read the research, and then what does my patient need? But sometimes you have to like remove yourself from that completely and again find the clinician who is the expert in whatever it is, because I can read about stuff all day, every day, but it's so different than somebody who lived that experience, right? So for me, I can talk about brain tumors till the cows come home. And I think I could communicate and educate you as the person who wants to work with somebody with brain tumors, but make it more digestible than if you just read stuff all the time. When I've done program development, I'm working with Dr. Brandamore, your colleague at the USF Speech Clinic. We're trying to work closer with deep brain stimulators, Parkinson's patients pre-op and post-op. I have never worked at a Parkinson's Center of Excellence that really had a multidisciplinary team like that. She did, right? Like, and she has. And so she's my clinician to this situation. I now have a pharyngeal manometry program, and same thing. Dr. Diane Longnecker, who is my clinical fellow mentor in the past, I've read about pharyngeal manometry. I have seen the patients, but like she's my clinician who like makes it digestible. So again, yeah, there's the doctors that we need, but like there's don't forget about our colleagues, I guess, is the to kind of get
Well,
you to that point.
yeah, yeah, no, and I like what you're saying. I can see it from two angles. The perspective that you brought up in terms of, so you've got the EVP triangle, you've got
Mm-hmm.
the clinician, you've got the patient, and you have the external sources. Actually, they revised that a little
Oh
bit
yeah.
lately. So I may,
Oh,
if I'm
I need to
misquoting
look at
it,
that.
well, no,
Yeah.
but it's still a valid model. But if I'm misquoting it, I hope no one hunts me down and who knows,
We'll put
chastises
it in the
me.
show notes, right?
There we go in the show notes. Yeah. But so the clinician side, the clinician perspective, like pulling yourself out of that, that's a really neat way to look at it because then that forces you to consider your other resources that you have and also areas where you might not know as much as somebody else. But back to what we were saying a moment ago, when you were talking about your impression statement and all the things that you're
Yeah.
outlining within that, seeing how like putting the physician there and
Mm.
then how do we fit into that process too? Because physicians get information from a lot of different areas and we are certainly a source of that area and can assist tremendously in their differential diagnosis if we're like this person has dysphagia characterized by XYZ and a motor speech disorder, this particular motor
Hmm.
speech disorder, that might fit a pattern that the neurologist is like, boom, and they get the right diagnosis, and that's largely
Exactly.
because of you. So
Yeah.
that's a really neat way to I think to look at it from both sides of that to exemplify the multidisciplinary component
Yeah.
and the interdisciplinary component of what we intra of what we do.
And again, that's like we think of Mayo Clinic as this ivory tower. That's like the grandfathers of Darley Aronson and Brown, establishing motor speech disorders, establishing dysarthrias. But like that's where this whole concept came from. And if you go there, they're not like they're the ivory tower in the sense that like I can look up to them and be like, wow. But like they are practicing what all of us are trying to get to. Like we do not have to start from scratch. They are in the room with a neurologist, and I just got to meet Dr. Utiansky's neurologist that works in, and he did a speech, and it was really funny. He was like, "Yeah, when I moved here, he wasn't from the States to begin with, and he like moved to me. He's like, I have to work with speech pathologists. What are you talking about?" And then now he's at the point where he's just like, I don't know what I would do without them. And so they work so in sync. They are on the same level. It's not this physician to speech pathologist. They are so collaborative, so equal. And I think that's a big piece of this, but it's not a new concept that we are from a speech perspective, from a swallowing perspective, we are part of the puzzle. We are the experts in this area, period, right? And so we have something to offer that somebody else does not. And we're doing a disservice if we don't advocate for our patients.
Yes, and I want to put ask for pause right there because I think that really brings this full circle with what we were talking about at the beginning.
Yeah.
How do we get involved in these multidisciplinary rounds if that's the way that we're going to best integrate ourselves within
Yeah.
multidisciplinary care? But there are other options too. But knowing your value, this is again important with self-awareness, knowing our value by understanding where we can fit into the differential diagnosis puzzle, demonstrating our value and being able to communicate that, being willing to advocate for ourselves and say like, hey, this is what some of the top tier medical centers are doing. I know that where our productivity, quote unquote, might go down, but if we're putting patients first, like first of all, it's going to help with patient care because we're going to get better diagnosis, more specificity of care, which is good. And let's assume, right, all these hospital administrators are super altruistic, and that's going to do it too. But in case that's not the case, it helps to know the financial repercussions of this too. Like what happens when patients are there in the hospital for longer? Well, you get paid less
Hmm.
per day because there's bundled care. If we're talking about like in an acute
Hmm.
care setting,
Right.
if they get readmitted for a similar diagnosis, would there be penalties that apply? What if they get a hospital acquired pneumonia that maybe you could have prevented by having an education on
Yeah.
oral hygiene or something like that? Just there are many ways that this doesn't just improve patient care and the patient experience, but from a financial perspective,
Hmm.
I think you can really sell your value to the hospital. You got to be willing to do that. You got to be willing to
Yeah.
do that and talk to other people who've had success in doing it. But that's huge, and that really
Yeah.
pushing us the right direction.
Yeah, I think if you're advocating for yourself for any sort of program development, I think if you can align with the values of your institution, right? You can do a quick Google search and what is a XYZ hospital? What are our mission values? I think that that's helpful. Everybody is everybody has different opinions about AI, but man, oh man, you want to write something like get into open evidence, get some of those articles to justify it. Make sure they hallucinate a lot of articles. So don't just stop there. Make sure you actually then go to read the articles. It's just helpful to find them. And then use something like Claude to put your perspective together. And then one of my favorite things to tell, and I mean, you could probably tell I get on a lot of soapbox. So this is like one of many favorite things that I like to tell like my students or any trainees. And then I was taught as a clinical fellow is if you have a problem, do not go to your superiors without a thought through solution. If you go to them and say, there's a problem, we don't really communicate with our other physicians, this is da 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 da, you're just complaining. That's all that is. It might be a valid, but you are using your boss, your manager, whatever, as a therapist for them to like appease your feelings. But if you come to them with a problem and a solution that could be totally wrong, right? It could be the wrong direction, but it shows that you thought through this, that you were there as a solution person,
Yeah.
not a problem person. You're not just there creating a hard list. You're saying, I can, like, here's the problem, and I'm going to like find the direction to go there. And you say, and again, baby steps. Stop going and saying, oh, and I heard Jaimie talking this, and this is how her swallowing center is. And so I need a
Yeah.
C-arm. I need a flexible scope. I need a manometry. That's the only way that this can get done. And like, that's not true, right? Say this is my short term. This is how I can get there. And then like, maybe this is what I can get in return.
Jaimie, I
But I
think
will say all of these things aren't going to happen overnight, or you're not going to get the dedicated time just because we all want it. It would be nice.
I think the small steps first is very, very valuable. I don't know if it's a story or if it's a sales technique or whatever. Like, you don't,
Yeah.
if you have a big sign you want to put in someone's yard, you don't knock on the door and say, hey, can I put this huge sign in your yard? You bring a small sign. You're like, hey, can I put this small sign in your yard for a little bit? And then you come back and you're like, hey, can I upgrade and make a bigger sign there? Because the sign's already there. You've already got your foot in the door. And so, parallel with this, if you're taking a small step, if you're asking for something that's not a huge deal in terms of the bottom line or whatever it is, that might be the opportunity for you to get in there and to demonstrate your value. It gives you time to communicate
Hmm.
with physicians or nurses or whoever. And that one, you've got your foot in the door. Two, it gives you the opportunity to demonstrate the value so that other people want you and might help to advocate for you as well.
Hmm.
And also we'll have to wrap up here pretty soon, but I love what you said about not going in and just kind of complaining. I have done that way too many times. And I may not have seen it as just complaining. I'm like, this is a problem and we need something better. But like I get so enthusiastic about it that I
Hmm.
want to talk about it now. Like, hey, let's talk about this
Yeah.
now. Let's figure things out. And I assume the same level of passion from somebody else,
Hmm.
which isn't necessarily the case. And then it seems like
Right.
I'm complaining. So great advice. I'm going to try to take that advice
Well,
to
it
heart.
yeah,
And
no,
I think it'll
I
help
do
things
love
be a
that
lot
one.
better.
It forces you to critically think through the things. Well, since we are talking about wrapping up, I can give you a story since I want to plug my
Yeah,
symposium. I want to talk
absolutely.
about how that came to fruition. So annually, June is Dysphagia Awareness Month. And so I saw what UC Davis and Stanford do, and they host these wonderful, so please look it up. They switch years, these wonderful full day or afternoon webinars and in person that's multidisciplinary, and it's free education for all about dysphagia. Like, what is a better way to celebrate June is Dysphagia Awareness Month? And then here I am. This is over 3 years ago. I had been here for about a year and a half, 2 years. And there's so much that even before I got here, I'd been practicing maybe 8 years. I had learned so much since I've worked here that I wanted to take that what I've learned and share it with everybody. And right before I was here, I was in these acute care hospitals that I got zero funding. I got zero support to learn more, right? And so here's these clinicians that want to learn more, but then they don't get the funding. And so then we're just stuck in this loop. And obviously, I'm speaking to the choir, Tim, because you host these great educational platforms. So I went to my boss, my like our GI physician, and I said, I want to do this swelling symposium. And I think I said it the first year and just didn't get much traction. And eventually, like, I think it was like February, March, and I said, I want to do this. And I got no. I was told no, right? And I was told no because it is a ton of work. It was way more work than I thought. But I just did it. I did it without any support. I did it without any help and without any funding. I'd never done anything like this before. And so the very first year, I found a free building. I hosted it on Teams. I found another wonderful Katie Johnson, who's at the speech clinic, who helped me with the CEUs. And
Mhm.
we had like over 500 people
Wow.
attend. And I proved that it was a good concept and that people wanted to be there. I got one sponsor to give me a couple $100s to feed us. And then Tampa General went, wow, that was great. I'm now going to give you administrative support. Now I'm going to give you money. And so then we were able to host it a second year. And then this past year, I've asked for sponsors, and sponsors have never been interested. I just get crickets. And now we have like, I don't know, 8 sponsors that are
Wow.
financially supporting us to hold this free continuing education unit or event. So that's my plug to say two things. One, this was my example of it was small steps. I had no support. I proved that it was a good concept by just doing it. It was a crap ton of work. My husband probably wanted to divorce me when I first started it because it was so much stress. But then I proved that people wanted to learn. I
Hmm.
proved that people would benefit from this. I proved that it was valuable for our center. And so now we're June 6th. We're hosting our third annual. We are at 60 to 70% capacity for in person, but online has full capacity. It's
Wow.
partial or full attendance. CUs, CMEs, we're trying to get not just speech pathologists, we want all of them, but we also want physicians. We want ENTs, we want GIs, we want anybody that wants to learn about dysphagia. And we have a multidisciplinary lineup. It's ENT, GI, psychology, allergy, and speech pathology. GI surgery are all who's talking to us. So really, like, I'm talking about what I'm saying, that I want to learn more from my colleagues and that I give this opportunity. And I'm working. The last thing I'd say is that hopefully soon, the recordings from the last 2 years will be available, not for continuing education units, but for like continuous learning free. And you just go up there and learn about it. So look up the USF Swallowing Symposium. We have an Instagram page. We have a website, free, but it costs a ton of time and money
Yeah.
from our standpoint. I mean, goodness, as you have this platform, it's a lot of work.
So USF Swallowing Symposium. Look that up.
Yep.
I can get a link to put it in the description too. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm glad to share that. I try to let the mission of Gap Education kind of be the guiding force for what's going
Mhm.
on. So even if it's supporting another event that's with another company and could potentially detract from something that I'm hosting, it still is helping to make our field better. And so
Yep.
that's super important to me. So I'm happy to put that information out there. And thanks for for providing an example of what you can do whenever you're really tenacious and
Yes.
committed to the field. Very
I'll
tenacious.
take tenacity. Yes, I love that.
Yeah, well, that's great. But so thank you also for joining us. We appreciate your background, perspective, all the different things. Is there anything you want to leave people with, or you can just say, have a good one?
Yeah, no, look me up on social media. Yeah, I can provide my contact information if anybody has questions or want to reach out.
Sounds good.
Thanks
All
for the
right.
time, Tim.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. See you soon. It's great to have you with us. Check out the show notes for resources and also about 2 events coming up. Jaimie had mentioned the 3rd annual USF Swallowing Symposium, which will be on Saturday, June 6th with the University of South Florida in person and on Teams. And Gap Education, or this company, is offering a course on neurological disorders in the speech pathologist. It's a 6-hour webinar focusing on neurological foundations, Parkinson's disease, ALS, progressive supranuclear palsy, myasthenia gravis, and stroke. That'll be on May 23rd, which is also a Saturday. Links to either event can be found in the show notes. And remember, our website is swallowthegap.com. Thanks again for listening, and hope to see you soon.